Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're looking at a food that, well, everyone knows it, but maybe don't really know it. I mean, sauerkraut.
Right.
Just the name itself, sour cabbage, sounds kind of simple, doesn't it? Maybe a little, I don't know, basic.
It really does. And that name totally misses the huge cultural, historical story behind it.
Exactly. Which is why, for this deep dive, we really want to get past that deli counter side dish image.
Yeah, we want to understand how this pretty simple process, just cabbage and salt, became such a powerful symbol of survival and ingenuity and, well, fermentation science, too.
It's amazing. It's a food tech that literally shaped history, saved lives, kept people fed for generations.
Yeah.
We've got historical stuff, science breakdowns on the fermentation, notes on traditional techniques.
It's a rich mix.
So let's dive in. We automatically think Germany, right? Sauerkraut, German name. But you're saying the real origins are way, way older and further east.
That's the fascinating part. That assumption is, well, it's common, but wrong. If you trace fermented cabbage back, you're going back over 2,000 years. Long before Germany as we know it.
2,000 years?
Yeah, we land right in ancient China.
Wow. 2 millennia for cabbage. So what was going on in ancient China? Why did they need to figure this out? Was it the climate? Logistics? Both, really. Think about these massive projects like building the Great Wall.
Yeah.
Huge numbers of workers, right? You needed food that was reliable, nutritious, and crucially, wouldn't spoil.
Especially through those harsh northern Chinese winters, I imagine. Fresh stuff wouldn't last.
Exactly. No fresh produce available for months. But the crews needed feeding year-round, so they needed a preservation method that could handle huge quantities and keep things edible.
Makes sense. Scalable and effective.
And here's the really interesting twist compared to what we know now. The earliest methods we hear about, they weren't using salt, not primarily. They preserved the cabbage and rice wine. Hold on, rice wine? Seriously, that's completely different. Rice wine suggests yeast, alcohol, not the bacteria we think of now.
It is a huge technical difference, you're right. It probably didn't taste quite like modern sauerkraut, not that clean, sharp sourness maybe.
But it worked. It preserved the cabbage.
It absolutely achieved the main goal. Preservation, the alcohol, the acidity from that fermentation, it stopped the spoilage microbes. But the key for our story is how that idea traveled.
Okay.
It moved west, along the Silk Road trade routes, and also probably carried by waves of Mongol conquest sweeping across Eurasia. That knowledge spread.
Right. Knowledge travels with people, with trade, with armies. And then Central Europe, Germany specifically, picks it up.
Yes, and this is where the major refinement happens. They took the core idea of fermenting cabbage, but swapped out the rice wine.
Which must have been expensive or harder to get consistently.
Probably both. Resource intensive for sure. They switched to something much more available, much more practical. Salt.
Just salt. Stripping it right back.
Exactly. It was pragmatic, economical. Salt was just more reliable, especially away from the coasts. And that simple switch changed everything chemically.
Okay, so if the Chinese method used the rice wine's alcohol and acidity, what does salt do when you just add it to shredded cabbage? How does that preserve anything?
The salt is actually brilliant. It's selective. First, osmosis. It pulls water out of the cabbage cells, creating its own brine.
Right.
But the crucial part, that high salt concentration stops almost all the bad guys. The spoilage bacteria, molds, they just can't handle it. But one group can.
The heroes of our story.
Pretty much. The Lactobacillus bacteria, they're salt tolerant, and in that specific environment with no competition, they thrive.
Okay, Lactobacillus, that's the key. Let's get into that a bit for everyone listening. It's not just good bacteria. What is it actually doing in there, in that sealed-off, no-oxygen environment?
It's basically eating and converting. Lactobacillus consumes the natural sugars, the carbohydrates that are already in the cabbage. And as it consumes those sugars, its waste product is lactic acid, lots of it. This lactic acid floods the environment, dropping the pH level way down.
How low are we talking?
Often down to 3.5 or even lower, super acidic.
And that's the preservative.
That is the preservative. That intense acidity makes it impossible for spoilage organisms to grow. It essentially pickles itself, locking in the nutrients at the same time.
So the sourness isn't just a flavor, it's the actual preservation mechanism. And back then, for centuries in Germany, this wasn't some fancy side dish. This was winter survival.
Absolutely. I mean, think about it. No refrigerators, long, cold winters, no fresh greens. Sauerkraut was vital. It provided essential nutrients, especially vitamin C, when literally nothing else was available.
The lifeline.
It really was a totally practical invention, way ahead of its time, really, ensuring people got nutrition through the lean months.
Which brings us to maybe its most dramatic role
Mm-hmm.
on the high seas. Age of exploration stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't just for winter anymore.
Right. This is where sauerkraut gets, like, world famous, because the huge problem on long sea voyages was scurvy.
Oh yeah, the nightmare disease.
Before the 18th century, it was devastating. Ships could lose, almost half their crew on a single long voyage.
Horrific. The weakness, bleeding gums, teeth falling out. Just awful. But ships carrying sauerkraut, they did better.
Significantly better, especially German ships or ships captained by people like James Cook, who are meticulous about provisions. They knew, empirically, maybe not why, but they knew this sour cabbage stopped the disease.
Even if they didn't know about vitamin C yet.
Exactly. That came much later. But sauerkraut holds on to its vitamin C incredibly well compared to other preserved foods, which tend to lose nutrients over time.
You mentioned Captain Cook. He's the famous one for tackling scurvy in the 1770s. Was sauerkraut a big part of his strategy?
Oh, absolutely central. On his second big voyage, the HMS Endeavour carried 60 barrels of it. Cook was apparently quite strict about making the crew eat it.
He knew it worked.
He knew something worked. He saw that this cabbage lasted, kept the crew healthy over years at sea, not just months, unlike fresh stuff. And that success story really cemented sauerkraut's reputation worldwide. Not just as food, but as a life-saving technology that, enabled long-distance exploration and changed the world map.
Wow. Save lives on the Great Wall, save lives crossing oceans. And now it's like the heart of German food identity. Fast forward to today, how does it show up on the plate in Germany?
It's still everywhere. It's that perfect, sharp, acidic cut-through for rich, fatty foods.
Like with sausages.
Oh, yeah. Classic bratwurst wouldn't be the same without it.
Yeah.
Or Schweinschacks, that big roasted pork knuckle, and just served warm alongside potatoes. It provides that essential balance.
But the tradition of making it, that seems to mean more than just, cooking. What does that whole process represent culturally?
I think it taps into some core traditional values, maybe especially German ones. Patience, definitely. Resourcefulness, thrift, and this deep sense of working with nature, not against it. Well, the whole process is based on trust, isn't it? You prepare everything just right, you set the stage,
Yeah.
and then you step back. You trust the microbes, these invisible natural forces, to do the transformation over weeks. Minimum intervention.
That's a powerful idea, trusting the natural process instead of trying to force it or speed it up with technology. Because making it sound simple, cabbage, salt, but getting it right consistently, that takes skill, craftsmanship.
Absolutely. The simplicity is deceiving. Success really depends on paying attention to the details right from the start.
Like choosing the cabbage.
Exactly. You need good raw material. Firm, juicy, high in natural sugars. Usually late harvest white cabbage is the best. That quality determines the final product.
And then the salt. You mentioned a specific ratio. 20 grams per kilogram of cabbage. That's quite precise. 2% concentration. How did people manage that consistently before modern scales? Seems risky.
Well, that 20 grams per kilo, that's us putting a number on what generations of makers knew by feel, by experience. Knowing the texture, maybe tasting the brine, judging a handful for this much cabbage. But you're right, it's a crucial balance. Too little salt. Spoilage happens. Too much salt. You kill off the lactobacillus and it just sits there, salty, but doesn't ferment properly, doesn't get acidic enough.
So they were walking this fine biological line using pure craft knowledge. Amazing.
It really is. And that salt starts the next step. The kneading, the massaging. You have to work the cabbage and salt together pretty hard sometimes until it releases its own liquid, enough to make its own brine. You don't add water.
No added water. Got it.
Yeah.
Which leads to what you said is maybe the biggest mistake people make. Oxygen.
Absolutely critical. Oxygen control. Once it's shredded and brined, you pack it down tight, and it must stay completely under the level of that natural brine the whole time it's fermenting.
Why is that so important?
Air is the enemy here. Exposure allows mold to grow, allows other unwanted aerobic bacteria to get a foothold. Keeping it submerged ensures that anaerobic, no oxygen environment that Lactobacillus needs to dominate and produce all that acid.
So pack it down, keep it submerged, no peeking.
Pretty much. And then back to that theme, patience. You just have to wait.
How long does that silent transformation usually take?
Depends on the temperature, but typically 2 to 3 weeks minimum. Needs to be in a cool, dark place. Colder temps mean slower fermentation, which some people feel gives a deeper, more complex flavor.
Okay. And can you jazz it up, add other
Oh,
flavors?
yeah, definitely. Traditional additions include things like caraway seeds. They give that warm, slightly aniseedy flavor. Plus, they're meant to be good for digestion.
Right, I've seen that.
Bay leaves add a nice aromatic touch. And some recipes mention adding thin slices of apple.
Apple. Why apple?
Well, apples have sugar. It gives the lactobacillus a little extra food, which can result in a slightly less sharp, maybe more rounded, subtly sweeter finish. Adds complexity.
Interesting. So, okay, what a journey. We've gone from ancient Chinese workers using rice wine across continents via trade and conquest to German farmers mastering it with just salt and the bacteria, and then onto ships saving sailors from scurvy. Sauerkraut is, wow, it's way more than just sour cabbage.
It really is. It's this incredible emblem of resilience, human ingenuity, and deep cultural heritage. A story of survival through, well, profound simplicity.
Yeah, simplicity is the word.
It really teaches us about this quiet brilliance, how minimal human effort, when aligned perfectly with natural forces, can achieve something so effective and long-lasting.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? Especially now. We're so obsessed with complex tech, fast solutions, global supply chains. And here's this 2,000-year-old method. It relies entirely on trusting nature. Lactobacillus doing its thing needs just two basic ingredients and demands patience. What can that ancient, super low intervention approach teach us today about food security, about sustainability, especially when things feel so fragile?
That is the question, isn't it? Definitely something worth fermenting over.
Huh? Well put. Maybe give it a try yourself.
Yeah, why not?
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.